On January 8th, 2022, Bob Saget crushed a comedy show. Hours later, he was found dead in his hotel room. Investigators combed through the room for evidence, but they still couldn't explain the tragic scene. It would be fun to claim that Bob Saget has a secret double life, and it's partly true. He did have a double life, but he made no secret about it. Some days you'd get the nice dad character who was full of hugs and appeared on Full House and America's Funniest Home Videos. On other days there'd be Bob Saget, the stand-up comedian with a shocking, curse-filled set that could make your toes curl. But the biggest secret Bob Saget had was his shocking and still unsolved last night alive. Robert Lane Saget was born on May 17, 1956, in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. His mother worked in hospital administration and his father was an executive in the supermarket business. Bob found his humorous side in a very unlikely place. Bob later said that he found humor when his family moved to Virginia. Here he attended a conservative synagogue, and Bob's resistance to the traditional status quo took the form of humor. Then, when the family moved to California, he met the Three Stooges member Larry Fine. Larry told him hilarious stories, and Bob's affinity for all things funny grew. But despite his developing love of comedy, he had a much more serious career planned for himself. Bob initially turned his back on his humor and decided to pursue a career in medicine. But when one of his teachers saw that he had the potential to be funny, he encouraged him to look into acting. Bob listened to his teacher and enrolled in film school, where he went on to win a Student Academy Award for his very first short film. But even with that early success, he just couldn't shake his love for making people laugh. Coincidentally, the film school was just a train ride away from New York City, so with his comedy dreams still lingering in his thoughts, he took advantage of the opportunity whenever he could. He went to the Big Apple to perform in comedy clubs. In one of his more memorable gags, he played the Beatles song While My Guitar Gently Weeps, while managing to use a bottle of water to make the guitar actually cry. But before long, a freak medical issue stopped him in his tracks. Bob had already enrolled in graduate courses at the University of Southern California when he became horribly ill. He went to the UCLA Medical Center on July 4th, and doctors realized that not only had his appendix erupted, but it was also gangrenous. Lucky for him, they managed to get it out just in time, essentially saving his life. The harrowing experience changed his life forever. Before his close brush with the end of his life, Bob described himself as both overweight and overconfident. But after that close call, his attitude changed completely. He made serious changes, putting in the work to restore his health. And soon, a slimmer, more confident Bob Saget was ready to take his career more seriously, and just in time too. A major network was waiting for Bob. Bob started his career with CBS as part of their morning show, but after a short time, another network approached him with a much more exciting offer. ABC was making a family-focused show called Full House, and they wanted Bob. But because of his commitment to the morning program, he couldn't do it. ABC went ahead with the pilot for Full House with actor John Posey. In the end, they weren't happy with the pilot or with Posey. The creator of Full House still wanted Bob, but he also had someone else in mind, Paul Reiser. After all was said and done, Reiser ended up choosing to work on My Two Dads, which had a similar storyline to Full House. And lucky for Bob, he managed to wrangle his way out of his other commitments and jump on board the new show. Interestingly enough, he turned out to be a total natural, in more ways than one. In an amusing turn of events, Bob didn't end up changing course completely. In his new role on Full House, his character raised his many daughters with the help of his oldest friend and brother-in-law. And his day job? Working as a co-host on a morning show called Wake Up San Francisco. That surely sounds like the perfect fit, but there was one thing about Bob Saget that didn't quite work well on the new set. Even with his new starring role, Bob still hadn't given up on his stand-up comedy career, but it soon started causing problems on the Full House set. Between takes of the family-oriented show, he often told adult-only kind of jokes right in front of the child actors. And while that's notably inappropriate, considering some of the children weren't even older than 3 years old, even more disturbing problems brewed on set. Despite the fair success of the first season, Bob didn't feel too happy about his working conditions. He felt that his two male co-stars, John Stamos and Dave Coulier, weren't getting along as well as they should be. The solution to this was for the three guys to hit the road to Las Vegas, but things didn't go quite as planned. Bob, John, and Dave headed out on their male bonding trip, but soon encountered an unexpected flaw in the plan. Back in 1982, Bob married Sherry Kramer. As a happily married man, he couldn't do all the Vegas-type activities that the two single guys came up with. So while John and Dave hit the town, Bob stayed behind in his hotel room. Though Bob ended up missing out on lots of the actual bonding time, the three guys did find one thing in common. They all had the same complaint about Full House. Twins Mary-Kate and Ashley Olsen played Michelle Tanner, the youngest child on Full House. Bob and his co-stars got jealous because the twins were getting too many scenes. The three guys went to the producers to complain. But Bob shouldn't have worried. He was about to get very, very busy. Though he didn't get as much shine as he wanted on his sitcom, an unexpected opportunity soon came knocking. Back at ABC headquarters, producers cooked up a new idea. They had seen a Japanese TV show where they played funny clips sent in by viewers, and decided to make a US version of the show. At first, they wanted Three's Company star John Ritter for the host, but when that fell through, they landed on Bob Saget as their second choice. Strangely enough, they didn't know the first thing about Bob's other show. When they approached Bob to host America's Funniest Home Videos, or AFV as it's known, they only knew about Bob Saget from his appearance on The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson. Somehow, they had no idea about Bob's leading role in Full House, despite the fact that by then the show proved a major success. As such, they faced more resistance than they likely expected. In other words, they had some major convincing to do. ABC worked to convince Bob by claiming he needed to change his reputation from the dorky dad on Full House. Perhaps Bob had his own private doubts about his geeky image, as he eventually saw the light. He signed on to host America's Funniest Home Videos, debuting in 1989. But with a hit sitcom and a new hosting gig, he soon found himself burning the candle at both ends. Between the two shows, Bob began appearing on a very regular basis in living rooms across America, but he still wanted to do more. For AFV, he insisted on writing some of his own material to introduce the video clips. At one point, he was so busy that he had to write for AFV while still in his dressing room for Full House. Unfortunately, life back at home didn't turn out to be too smooth either. Back in 1985, Bob lost one of his sisters, Andrea, to a brain aneurysm, but heartache like this was something familiar to the Saget family. You see, Bob had grown up with twin brothers, but they both passed away at birth. That's a heavy burden for any family to carry, but sadly, his heartache didn't end there. In 1991, his sister Gay got a chilling diagnosis. Bob's sister Gay had scleroderma, an incurable autoimmune disease. Helping Gay through this debilitating disease was a full-time job. Later, he wondered how his parents cope with caring for her on top of all the other tragedy they'd already endured. Sadly, 2 years after her diagnosis, Bob's sister succumbed to her illness. A troubled Bob Saget had to do something with his pain. Bob had to find a healthy way to deal with the loss of his sister. He became a board member of the Scleroderma Research Foundation. He felt grateful for the chance to raise awareness about this horrible disease. But it wasn't enough. Bob was still dealing with his emotions, and he knew he had to do more. In the end, he turned to an old love to get him through it. 2 years after his sister's passing, Bob wrote and directed a film about the illness that had taken her life. The result is the ABC television movie called For Hope. The film aired in November of 1996 and did very well with audiences. In fact, it hit the top of the ratings for its time slot. Not only did Bob find a way to memorialize his sister, but he also revisited a skill he had learned and loved back in film school. Perhaps he'd been waiting for that type of validation about his work behind the camera, considering the direction he went in next. In 1998, funny man Norm Macdonald had written a comedy called Dirty Work and needed a director. When the producer told Macdonald that he lined up Bob Saget to direct, Norm was not impressed at all. He knew Bob Saget from Full House and didn't want the guy who played a dorky father on TV to direct his raunchy comedy. That is, Norm didn't want him until he learned about one serious throwback from Bob's past. To get Norm Macdonald on board to hire Bob Saget as a director, the producer ended up doing something fairly unusual. He told the comedian about Bob's old film school debut, Through Adam's Eyes. From the outside looking in, it's hard to see why this might have convinced Norm. For one, the short film was several years old by this time. Furthermore, the documentary about a boy's illness stood in stark contrast to the proposed comedy. And yet, somehow it worked. Bob got the job, but he got off to a rough start. As director, Bob hired insult comedian Don Rickles to join the cast of Dirty Work. Bob seemed to be somewhat in awe of Rickles' humor, so much so that he showed his respect in a costly way. He spent a hefty chunk of the budget just filming Rickles mouthing off for the camera for one entire shooting day. This landed Bob in some hot water with the heads of production, but he didn't stop there. When he finally got around to filming the actual story, there was another problem. The script that Norm Macdonald had written was definitely for adults only, and of course, Bob didn't hold back on amping up the raunchier aspects. Another well-known comedian who also appeared in the film, Chevy Chase, loved the inappropriate nature of the story so much that he pressed to make sure that MGM didn't ask for any cuts. But when the film received an R rating from the MPAA,